So the newest tactic for stopping Russian assaults are caltrops, or small metal spikes. That's it. And they're proven to be pretty effective. So here's how it works. Drones drop these spikes on likely avenues of approach. Then when Russian vehicles drive over them, their tires are popped. Troops are forced to dismount and pretty quickly become easy pickings for Ukrainian drones, artillery, and small arms fire. In fact, it looks like this has become pretty standard practice for the Ukrainian 63rd Mechanized Brigade near Liman. This was outlined earlier today in an article in Euromaidan where they say Ukrainian defenders revive Roman anti-cavalry tactics to achieve devastating kill ratio against Russian forces. In the sector near Liman, despite holding a substantial bridgehead across the Zarabets River, Russian forces remain critically overstretched. Their goal to establish a direct route towards Liman, a town they fruitlessly sought to capture for over 2 years, remains distant. Consequently, Russian commanders have redirected significant effort towards breaching the defensive line around Torsky, hoping to improve their severely limited logistical situation across the Zarabets River. Standing firmly against this intense Russian pressure is Ukraine's battle-hardened 63rd Mechanized Brigade, exploiting favorable terrain. And we've got a bunch of videos here from the 63rd Mechanized we'll run through showing their defense of this area. But first, I thought it was worth pulling up a map to give you an idea of the area we're looking. This is deep state map that I just aggressively zoomed into the east. So Liman is over in this area here. Kind of, you can see the Russian line starting to protrude a little bit to the north. But the focus area for today's video is going to be this section right here, just east of Torsky. This is where the Ukrainian defense with the caltrops is being used most effectively right now from what we can tell. Now turning to a little more detailed map, this is the satellite view, same mapping resource here. This will help explain as they talk through the issues that Russian forces are facing when trying to assault Torsky right here. They say to the north of Torsky, large reservoirs limit Russian maneuverability and prevent effective flanking actions, isolating their frontal assault. To the south, expansive forested areas have allowed Ukrainian forces to establish deep fire control zones, creating lethal choke points for attacking Russian infantry and motorbike assaults. So what they're getting at is if you're trying to take this town right here, which would be en route to Liman, to the north, you've got a lot of water barriers. So it's very hard for Russian forces to come around to the north. To the south, heavily wooded, with Ukrainian control of a lot of this area, or at least drone control over a lot of this area, and a lot of bottlenecks for Russian forces to move through. In turn, what they're seeing is this pocket right here. This area is where Russian forces are trying to find a way to break through Torsky, limited to the north, limited to the south. So if they're going to take it, they have to take it head on. Ukraine is taking advantage of this. Now, turning back to the assessment here, they say despite substantial increased assaults, Russian forces face severe shortages of armor, forcing commanders to resort primarily to infantry assaults on motorcycles and ATVs, which is nothing new. We're seeing that all across the front, and it's been a theme for quite a while now. The assaults have gotten smaller just due to the nature of the drone threat and how extensive defensive positions have been all across the front. So we're not seeing battalion or even company-sized assaults, 100-plus men. It's usually squad-sized elements, 5, 10, 15 maybe, carrying out these assaults one at a time. And more, we're seeing Russian forces. There was a bit of we kind of saw a timeline here where it was all armored vehicles for a period of time. Then about a year ago, it shifted into these kind of turtle tank looking things where they were essentially old tanks modified into armored personnel carriers. It was essentially a way, and MTLB, some other armored vehicles. It was essentially a way for Russia to take their existing armored vehicle stocks and use them to transport a number of troops to the front line. So they would run them up to the front, drop the troops off, sometimes provide fire support, and then turn and try to pick up another group to move them across what is essentially right here, and the map does a good job of showing this no man's land, where you're really exposed to Ukrainian drone and artillery strikes before you get to the front lines. What we've seen in the last probably 6 months or so has been an increased reliance on unarmored vehicles and focus on mobility and speed, ATVs and motorcycles. And it's incredibly deadly to the soldiers that are trying to cut across no man's land. Of course, very susceptible to drones, artillery, mortars, anything that goes boom, any sort of shrapnel. But what Russia is leaning on is rather than a slow armored vehicle, they're sacrificing armor for speed. It's not unique to this area of the front. They say, in response, the 63rd Brigade has perfected a ruthless, cost-effective defensive strategy that has yielded a stunning kill-to-death ratio in their favor. The extraordinary figure indicates that for each Ukrainian soldier lost, Russian forces lose around 66 troops. Now, word of caution with that, I've had a hard time from day one of assessing total casualties throughout this conflict. In this situation, we are seeing a lot more Russian assaults than Ukrainian assaults. Generally speaking, that is going to produce, the assaulting force is likely to sustain higher casualties. So I wouldn't write that off entirely, but the specific numbers, it's hard to validate independently. They say key to Ukraine's remarkable defensive success here is the innovative revival of ancient Roman warfare tactics, particularly the widespread use of caltrops. Historically, Roman soldiers employed these small metal devices designed with spikes positioned in all directions as highly effective area denial tools. Placed on roads, fields, or forest pathways, caltrops punctured enemies' horses' hooves, forced troops into the open, vulnerable spaces, and slowed advancing units significantly, enabling Roman forces to saturate their exposed enemies with projectiles. Now, the Ukrainian 63rd Brigade applies this ancient tactic, using drones to disperse modern version of caltrops across Russian assault paths. Unlike traditional mines, caltrops are inexpensive, safe to deploy remotely, and difficult to detect through drone surveillance. And we've got some pictures of what these look like and some videos. Incredibly cheap, right? Like, these can be made from scrap metal pretty easily. They don't have to be razor sharp to achieve their desired goal. And what they're going after here is any sort of wheeled vehicle. So we're seeing a lot of assault vehicles hit, because that's where these are being placed. But should the line shift further inland, there's a situation here as well where some of these left over that are somewhat hard to detect could also pierce the tires of artillery systems or larger wheeled transport vehicles. They say when Russian motorbike assaults inevitably run over these hidden traps, they are flung off their bikes and forced into exposed areas to clear these small but numerous obstacles, instantly becoming easy targets for Ukrainian artillery, small arms fire, and precision drone strikes. And this is one of those things where, a couple keynotes here. First off, you can say, well, just go around them. Easier said than done. And the speed that some of these motorcycles are moving makes it very challenging to navigate around a bunch of small spikes that you might not see until you're right on top of them. Remember, these guys are entering an area where they are on the watch out for drone strikes, direct and indirect fire. They can't go slow. Like, that's one of the reasons they're on the motorcycles, is to try to go fast through these kill zones. As they go fast, they have a harder time seeing some of these obstacles. And what we're seeing a lot of is not, as the article here talks about, they're getting off their vehicles and clearing the roads. More and more, it looks like the tires are being popped, the motorcycles become useless, and the soldiers then have to hunker down way further back from the line of contact than they had hoped, and are watched over and eventually eliminated by the drones of the 63rd. Now, they add to this, saying the desperation of Russian forces in this area is increasingly evident. Troops are frequently spotted employing thermal cloaks, we've got some videos of this here, intended to shield them from detection, yet their poor implementation renders them ineffective, making Russian soldiers even more visible to Ukrainian drones equipped with standard or thermal imaging. Consequently, geolocated drone footage frequently shows Russian units easily identified and swiftly eliminated, despite their attempts at concealment. They wrap up by saying, recognizing their unfavorable situation, Russian soldiers in the sector are increasingly choosing to surrender. And we have actually seen a fair number of Russians surrender in this specific area of the front, more than in some other sectors. So read into that what you will. It might have to do with the quality or the source of the Russian soldiers that are there. It may have to do with the type of combat they're facing. It may have to do with the Ukrainian tactics. Who knows? But there have been a lot of Russians surrendering in this area more than some other sectors of the front. The hot ones, specifically like Sumy to the north and Pokrovsk to the south. Now, one thing worth noting, anytime we bring up some of these new tactics, and inevitably somebody will say, well, the Russians are doing that as well, and isn't this a risk to the Ukrainians? It could be, potentially, for sure, but the tactics are not being employed the same way right now. By and large, we are seeing Russia on the assault, so this type of tactic is a very good defensive measure. Should Ukraine go on the attack, this could very well be used against them as well. So it's not like Ukraine is immune to this by any stretch, but across the entirety of the front lines right now, it is Russia on the attack, exposing themselves to this type of defensive measure. Now, there's not been a lot of Russian commentary on this tactic quite yet. Diary of a Paratrooper mentioned this not long ago, where he said, quote, The enemy has started dropping star-shaped spikes on roads at the entrances to forward positions and along them in some areas of the front. Be careful. Watch your step. You can puncture both your leg and the tire of your car. Look, the challenge here, again, these are incredibly inexpensive. They're easy to drop from drones, and it's hard to detect. I mean, if you're walking along the path, yes, you'd be able to see them, especially because the focus here is not dropping these in heavily vegetated wood lines, right? You're not trying to hide these like you might try to hide anti-personnel mines. In this case, you want them out on areas that are likely to see wheeled vehicle traffic, which is generally more open than not. But even then, even if you see them and you get out of the vehicle and decide to clear this off, as that article mentioned, you're now exposing yourself to Ukrainian fire. And I would be shocked that if Ukraine is not overwatching each one of these obstacles they put in place, so the minute that does happen, they can mass drones and artillery fire on the Russian forces trying to clear the road. So interesting tactic, going back quite a bit in history to pull out some old Roman caltrops. And we have seen them used to a degree earlier in the war, but it seems like in this specific location with the 63rd, it is like a core component of their defense. Now, we did get some interesting news yesterday where it appears that President Trump is becoming increasingly frustrated with Russian President Vladimir Putin. In fact, it sounds like that 50-day memo that he gave, or note, in 50 days or else, has shortened. Not entirely sure what it has shortened to, but he did yesterday issue a new ultimatum. Let's give that a listen.
Very well, but 5 times, and every time 4 times maybe, but we've had discussions, you and I have had discussions. Yeah. We thought we had that settled numerous times, and then President Putin goes out and starts launching rockets into some city like Kiev and kills a lot of people in a nursing home or whatever. You have bodies lying all over the street. And I say that's not the way to do it. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm very disappointed. I'm disappointed in President Putin. Very disappointed in him. So we're going to have to look, and I'm going to reduce that 50 days that I gave him to a lesser number because I think I already know the answer what's going to happen.
So I know that's something that a lot of folks have been hammering for a while now, that Putin has no interest in pursuing any sort of negotiated settlement, an actual just end to this war, and it does seem like Trump is coming around to that. There's no indication if he's moving that 50 days down to 10, down to 5, if it's all up right now. We'll see. Now, when it comes to Russia timelines, those have kind of been a joke in the past, and Russian sources here in a minute have kind of mocked that because President Trump has laid out 2-week ultimatums to Russia, I think 3 times now, maybe more. That said, when he laid out an ultimatum to Iran, he ended up carrying out military strikes against Iran the minute that 60-day window was up. So choose your path, right? Either he's going to follow through or he's not. Russian sources, of course, have their own interpretation of what this means. But sticking with President Trump here for a minute, he talks about how Putin has to make a deal. And this gets at something that I think may be a mistake. And it's the assumption that Putin is acting rationally. But let's give that a quick listen.
He's got to make a deal. It's too many people are dying. It's a really bloody war. And the 5 is now, they're really telling me that number is obsolete. It's like 7.
That's terrible.
So you have 7,000 Russian and Ukrainian soldiers dying every single week for no reason whatsoever. So you would think, based on common sense, you would think he'd want to make a deal. We'll find out.
So this is actually something that's always concerned me quite a bit, not just in this conflict, but any conflicts around the world, is when you have rational actors on both sides, you can generally come to some sort of solution. Because as President Trump is talking about here, and he's hammered on for months now, is the idea that this war is just in that clip. It's costing lives of Ukrainians and Russians. It's hammering both of their economies. It's withdrawn Russia from the global stage, right? There's so many different things that point to this being bad. And you'll hear President Trump over and over again say, all of these people are dying for no reason. And I think that's grounded in the idea that Putin is acting rationally. I don't know that that's the case. And if that's not the case, it's scary because what do? It opens up a whole other can of worms. But that is something that President Zelensky kind of harped on in response to this meeting with President Trump, or these comments from President Trump. Zelensky said, quote, "Yesterday, very important words were spoken by President Trump about how the Russian leadership wastes the world's time talking about peace while simultaneously killing people. We all want true peace, worthy and lasting. Ukraine and all of Europe, the United States, many decent leaders and countries in the world who support us. Everyone needs calm in international relations and predictability in life. Everyone, but not Russia. At the end of yesterday, almost at midnight, Russian aviation bombed the territory of a correctional facility in the Zaporizhia region. This was a deliberate strike, targeted, not accidental. The Russians could not have not known that they were hitting civilians in this colony. Many were killed, another 43 were injured, including people with very serious injuries. And this was done after the absolutely clear position of the United States was voiced, supported by the world, that Russia must end this war and move to diplomacy. Every killing of our people by the Russians, every Russian strike when a ceasefire could have long been in place if Russia had not refused. All this shows that Moscow deserves very tough, truly painful, and therefore fair and effective sanctions pressure. They must be forced to stop the killings and bring peace. Ukraine welcomes the efforts of President Trump, his determination to achieve peace. We thank all of the leaders who helped protect Ukraine and pressure Russia. Peace is possible, but only when Russia ends the war it started and stops tormenting people. Again, something I want you to keep back in mind when looking at this is, what if we don't have two rational actors having this conversation? And there's no indications right now that Putin is wanting to move towards peace at all. In fact, Dmitry Medvedev issued a statement yesterday saying, quote, Trump's playing the ultimate game with Russia, 50 days or 10. He should remember two things. Russia isn't Israel or even Iran. Each new ultimatum is a threat and a step towards war, not between Russia and Ukraine, but with his own country. Don't go down the Sleepy Joe road. And U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham responded to that, saying, quote, to those in Russia who believe that President Trump is not serious about ending the bloodbath between Russia and Ukraine, you and your customers will soon be sadly mistaken. You will also see that Joe Biden is no longer president. Get to the peace table. And Medvedev responded, saying, quote, it is not for you or Trump to dictate when to get to the peace table. Negotiations will end when all of the objectives of our military operation have been achieved. Work on America first, Gramps, is how he ends it. So again, what if Russia has no desire to negotiate no matter what? I think we're starting to see President Trump and some in his administration come around to that it might not be a matter of sanctions. It might not be a matter of sternly worded letters or angry phone calls or further isolation of Russia from the world stage. And resolving this conflict might be significantly harder than was initially assumed. Sticking with the Russian assessment here, mill blogger Alexander Kotz kind of poked fun at President Trump, saying, quote, let's give Donald a hint. Mr. President, progress will happen as soon as you disconnect the Ukrainian armed forces from Starlink. That is, if you still have any control over Elon Musk. If you disconnect it, everything will end very quickly. You won't have time to get reelected for a third term, and you could quite possibly go down in history as a peacemaker. We would even support that nomination. But Trump won't go for that. The super profits that the American defense industry is making from the conflict in distant Europe turn him from politician mode into businessman mode. Or maybe Trump is just getting old, and in 10 to 12 days, he simply won't remember what he said today. He fences deadlines so elegantly that not everyone believes them today. So, yes, some stronger words from Trump. Looks like he's probably going to try to pressure Putin in some additional ways in the near future. We'll see. The Russians are pretty skeptical that anything is actually going to happen. And as you can see, Medvedev pushing back, like, do whatever you want. We are going to finish this war however we see fit. And hopefully we're kind of coming to terms with that and recognizing that something additional, something new, something else has to be done if we truly want to see a just end to this war. But that's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.